Hey guys, tonight we dive, nose first, into the filth and funk of Queen Elizabeth II's personal hygiene. Imagine this. Your fingers gently push open a heavy oak door, hinges creaking just enough to make you second-guess your life choices. The air hits you first. It's not the lavender or the rosewater people love to romanticise, it's something heavier. Stale, chalky, almost metallic. You step into her private chamber and immediately regret not wearing gloves, a mask, or perhaps a full hazmat suit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where and when you're suffering through this with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, stunned by the sight in front of you. The Virgin Queen, immortalised in endless portraits as a divine vision in white, sits with a stillness that would make a statue jealous. But now you're up close, and that alabaster glow, it's not a natural radiance. It's layers, yes, layers, of white lead paint thick enough to fill a crack in the palace wall. Her face is a living sculpture, brittle and chalky. You notice how her expression never changes, and for good reason. Smiling too wide could cause the dried paste to flake off in tiny, snow-like chunks. This wasn't just makeup, it was armour, and Elizabeth wore it daily. After suffering from smallpox in 1562, she was left with pitted scars on her face. But rather than hide away, she leaned into the powder, and the powder leaned back with a vengeance. Lead-based cosmetics like ceruse were a deadly blend of vinegar and white lead, applied liberally to give the illusion of purity and perfection. You wonder how no one noticed her skin literally peeling beneath the surface. But hey, it's the 16th century. The bar for glowing skin was pretty low. Her ladies-in-waiting prepare the concoction each morning, grinding and mixing the powder with a precision that makes you wonder if they're chemists or accomplices. You watch one of them dab it gently onto Elizabeth's cheek, then layer on vermilion for a soft blush. The Queen doesn't flinch. She's used to the sting, used to the weight, used to her skin slowly dying underneath. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth actually knew how toxic her beauty routine was. Some believe she was warned but ignored the risk in favour of maintaining an untouchable mystique. Others think the dangers weren't understood until long after her death. Either way, her makeup wasn't just a vanity project, it was political theatre. She couldn't be seen as ageing, vulnerable, or anything less than divine. Her face became a canvas not just for makeup, but for power. And let's not forget the fringe detail that really drives this home. Elizabeth didn't remove her makeup each night. Not completely. At best, it was scraped off gently with a linen cloth, but often she'd simply layer the next day's application over whatever was left behind. You picture it now. The slow accumulation of lead paste, day after day, like a chalky lasagna of facial decay. You inch closer to a gilded mirror propped against the vanity. It's cloudy, tarnished, like it's seen too much. The Queen examines herself there daily, smoothing the surface with rosewater and egg whites, a finishing touch that gives her skin a porcelain sheen, but not even eggs can hide the truth. Tiny cracks snake across her cheeks like dry riverbeds. Her lips, painted blood red with a mercury-based pigment, tremble just slightly as she speaks. You suppress a cough. The smell of metal is unmistakable. Every surface in the room is coated with a fine white dust, on the brushes, the combs, even the hem of her gowns. You resist the urge to sneeze. The ladies are whispering now, gossiping about the time a courtier leaned in too close and left with a white smear on his velvet doublet. They laugh softly. Elizabeth doesn't. What makes this whole scene even more surreal is the contrast. Outside these walls, peasants are lucky to have a bar of soap. Inside, the Queen is essentially mummifying herself in toxic chemicals. One represents squalor, the other, status. But both are filthy in their own right. You wonder what would happen if she ever just washed it all off. What would she look like without the mask? Would the court still bow? Would the portrait still glow? And here's a lighter moment. One of her dogs, probably a spaniel, possibly named Saucy, bounds into the room, skidding slightly on the polished floor. It jumps into Elizabeth's lap, tail wagging, completely oblivious to the avalanche of lead it just disturbed. A flurry of white dust fills the air, and for a split second, you feel like you're inside a snow globe of royal toxins. She doesn't blink. She just pets the dog with gloved fingers, barely moving her painted face. You try to hold in a chuckle, thinking this is the closest thing she's had to exfoliation in months. And here's something else that sticks with you. While she was powdering her face into immortality, her doctors were probably prescribing treacle, clove water, or even powdered unicorn horn for ailments that were, in hindsight, probably caused by all this makeup in the first place. Irony, thy name is Tudor medicine. There's a quiet tension in the room, the kind you only feel when everyone's pretending not to notice what's happening. Like the fact that the Queen's complexion is slowly greying, or that her eyes, though sharp, look tired. Behind the facade, there's a woman trying desperately to hold it all together. But you're not done here yet, because under that heavy foundation, beneath the blush and the painted lips, lies the first crusty clue to a much grimmer truth. Elizabeth may have ruled a kingdom, but her own body? That was a battleground, and her face was just the beginning. You're still standing there, not entirely sure whether your nose has adjusted to the room or just surrendered. But what you do notice is the Queen's head, tilted ever so slightly, cradled beneath a crown of curls that, at first glance, seem regal, until you get a little closer. You lean in, perhaps foolishly, and that's when it hits you. The wig. Not just any wig. A marvel of engineering and deception, perched proudly where Elizabeth's real hair once lived. Only problem. It reeks. Not the kind of smell you'd expect from fine perfumes or rosewater, but something far more tragic. Like wet hay, forgotten laundry, and a hint of... What is that? Mouse. Elizabeth started losing her hair after smallpox. Yes, the same infection that left those facial scars. But hair loss was the lesser evil, and she found a quick fix. Wigs. Dozens of them. Wigs made from horsehair, human hair, even goat hair when the style required something extra stiff. They were curled, dyed red to match her younger self's locks, and powdered into submission. And they weren't washed. Ever. You step behind her, observing the intricate wefts and ringlets. Some of the strands are fraying, sticking out at odd angles. It's like trying to tame a bale of straw with a comb. One of the ladies in waiting lifts the wig slightly to adjust it, and you catch a whiff of what lies beneath. Scalp rot, mildew, and trapped sweat. You flinch. She doesn't. She's used to it. To keep the smell manageable, they douse the wigs in lavender, rosemary, and, your favourite, a heavy sprinkle of orris root powder. But it's a lost cause. The scent combo is confusing. 1 second, you smell spring flowers. The next, it's a wet dog wrapped in lace. You notice one wig propped on a wooden stand in the corner. It looks like it hasn't moved in weeks. Dust clings to it like it's a prized heirloom, and something tiny scurries out from underneath. Was that a mouse? Probably. They were known to nest in wigs, especially those stored near warmth or food, and the Tudor court had plenty of both. That's your fringe detail tonight. Rodent roommates. The Queen likely shared her royal headpieces with uninvited, whiskered guests. Now, let's talk scalp health, or the lack thereof. Because if you were wearing a thick, tight-fitting wig every day, sweating underneath layers of makeup and lace, your skin wouldn't be thrilled either. Elizabeth often covered her real scalp with a coif or linen cap to protect it from irritation, but the result was more of a petri dish than a prevention method. Sores, rashes, and infected follicles were common, made worse by tight pins that dug into the skin. You see one lady quietly pull out a pin with a dried spot of blood on it and replace it, like she's adjusting a painting. No reaction from the Queen. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth preferred the wigs purely for fashion or as a way to maintain authority. After all, her hair had once been a symbol of youthful power, and the loss of it was more than vanity, it was vulnerability. The wigs let her stay iconic, instantly recognisable, and untouched by time. Some scholars say she had over 80 of them. Others guess it was fewer, but meticulously maintained and rotated. Either way, not one of them got the luxury of soap and water. As you watch, one of the ladies picks up a fresh wig for the evening's audience. It's bigger, puffier, almost clownish. You stifle a laugh, thinking it could double as a weather system. But the Queen nods, signalling her approval. The wig is gently placed atop her skull, shifted a millimetre to the left, then dusted with more scented powder. It's like frosting a cake you're not allowed to eat. You wonder how no one at court mentioned the smell, but then you remember, they were all doing it too. Wigs were a unisex fashion, and they all stank together. Perfumes didn't just mask odour, they served as survival tools. Without them, the whole palace might collapse from its own stench. There's something oddly intimate about it all. Elizabeth's identity, literally resting on her scalp, was rebuilt every day by a circle of silent, patient women, and none of them ever dared question the ritual. Even as lice crawled across the linen caps or bugs nested in the wefts, the show had to go on. Because the Queen must always appear composed, even if her head itched like fire. And just when you think things can't get worse, you notice a damp spot forming beneath her wig's edge. Is it sweat? Some kind of herbal oil? A touch of both, you suspect. You watch it slide down the side of her temple, only to be dabbed away by a lace handkerchief that, judging by its hue, has been used before. You suddenly remember the old saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. But in Elizabethan England, it was more like optional. And here's your comedic moment of the hour. One of the younger maids sneezes while holding the powder. A white cloud explodes across the Queen's shoulder like a snowstorm in July. Everyone freezes. The Queen slowly turns her head, not enough to break the wig seal, and gives her the kind of glare that could sour cream. No words are exchanged, but the poor girl turns pale as a ghost. You nearly lose it. Now, take a moment to imagine yourself in her shoes, literally. Heavy velvet gowns, multiple layers of petticoats, lead melting off your cheeks, and a wig that smells like damp attic. You'd give up halfway through breakfast. But Elizabeth endured, not just for show, but because it was expected. She was the monarch, the image of the state. That image could never crumble, not even when the mice came out to play. And here's the final thought as you back slowly out of the room. If this was the best hygiene the country had to offer, the gold standard, then you'd hate to know what the peasants were doing. Or not doing. The Queen's wig wasn't just a style choice. It was a decaying crown of illusion, maintained daily with equal parts artistry and denial. You close the door behind you. A puff of lavender-scented air follows you out. It's not comforting. It's a warning. You shuffle into the next room, only to find yourself face to face with something truly alarming. Queen Elizabeth is smiling. Not the mysterious half-smile from her portraits, but a real, full-toothed grin. And you instantly regret wishing to see her happy. Her teeth are an adventure. A jagged, uneven mix of ivory and brown, with enough decay to make a Victorian dentist faint. Some are missing. Others lean at awkward angles like drunken soldiers on their last shift. A few are shockingly black, stained, rotted, or maybe just clinging to life out of spite. This is not the smile of a monarch. It's the grimace of a woman who has probably never seen a toothbrush in her life. And she hadn't. Tooth care in the Elizabethan era was mostly theoretical. The Queen's dental routine, if you can call it that, involved wiping her teeth with cloth and rinsing with honey wine or vinegar. Not exactly Colgate approved. Sugar was a status symbol, rare, imported, and extremely expensive. Naturally, Elizabeth, Queen of Indulgence, adored it. She sprinkled it on everything. Fruits, meats, even vegetables. Her fondness for sweetmeats was legendary. Unfortunately, so were the consequences. One contemporary noted her teeth were very black, a detail that shocked foreign diplomats and visiting nobility. There's even a story about a Polish ambassador who struggled to understand her words during an official meeting because he was so distracted by the state of her mouth. Honestly, you don't blame him. It's like trying to focus on a state address while being hypnotised by a set of crumbling dominoes. The irony: black teeth became fashionable among her court. Yes, courtiers literally darkened their own teeth to imitate Elizabeth's sugar-stained smile. You imagine a young noblewoman smearing soot between her molars and whispering, "Do I look queenly yet?" It's equal parts devotion and dental disaster. And here's your quirky tidbit. When teeth hurt, and they often did, remedies included stuffing the cavity with crushed herbs, wax, or even powdered frogs. That's right, frogs. Someone thought frog powder might numb a toothache. You're not sure if it worked, but it probably tasted like regret. But even with her blackened teeth and frequent mouth pain, Elizabeth rarely let discomfort show. The woman who ruled with an iron will wasn't about to let a molar dethrone her. She occasionally used clove oil to numb her gums, a trick still used today. But instead of neat little droppers, she tied clove buds into threads and chewed them during court meetings, like royal dental floss soaked in spice. You spot a strand of these clove threads on a side table near her writing desk. Each knot is soaked through, dark and sticky. One's been chewed so thoroughly it looks like a bit of twine soaked in tar. You shudder slightly, then catch yourself wondering if they ever change them out. The answer? Probably not. Fresh clove was expensive, and like everything in her court, it was rationed and reused. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth ever had teeth pulled during her reign. Some sources say yes, that she endured brutal extractions without anaesthesia, her iron resolve masking the agony. Others suggest she refused all invasive treatment, relying instead on opiates and herbal poultices to get her through. Either way, you imagine the conversations. Sevens. Your Majesty, you must remove it. Sevens. No. Sevens. But it's infected. Sevens. I said no. Sevens. Power doesn't negotiate with plaque. And then there's the breath. Oh, the breath. No one wrote about it directly, probably out of fear, but you can piece it together from the clues. Blackened teeth, gum infections, layers of undigested sugar. It wasn't great. Elizabeth is known to have carried sweet herbs in her handkerchiefs, and even chewed parsley between meals to try and freshen up. Admirable effort, but parsley only goes so far when your mouth is a bacteria rave. You watch her now as she carefully lifts a goblet of spiced wine. Her lips part just enough for you to glimpse the battlefield within. Then she sips, slow and regal, like this is the most luxurious moment of the day. And maybe it is. For all the filth around her, this is her sanctuary. No one questions the Queen, not her smile, not her habits, not the strange brown flecks on her napkin. And just when you think you've seen enough, one of her ladies enters carrying a delicate silver spoon and a tiny glass jar. You lean in, expecting a paste, maybe a rinse. Nope. It's powdered sugar, meant to be dabbed directly onto the tongue to freshen her breath. You blink. Sugar. To cure bad breath caused by sugar. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. A small chuckle escapes you. It's involuntary. One of the maids hears you and offers a side glance, but says nothing. She knows. They all know. This is theatre. A continuous performance of elegance, performed daily under increasingly grim conditions. No one dares to break character. You take a few steps back and glance at the ornate wooden chair she uses for private audiences. The armrest is worn smooth where her hand rests, gripping tightly when pain flares from her jaw. Her robes, so pristine from a distance, are frayed at the cuffs. You spot a faint smear of blood, fresh. Along the edge of her lace collar. Could be a nosebleed. Could be her gums. You don't ask. And here's your joke for the road. Imagine being the poor artist asked to paint a flattering portrait of Elizabeth's radiant smile. You'd need creativity, courage, and a very strong imagination. As you drift toward the hallway, you hear laughter, court jesters or ladies gossiping. Someone mentions how handsome the Spanish envoy is. Someone else whispers, he didn't kiss her hand. Maybe he couldn't get past the teeth. The laughter swells, then dies down just as quickly. Because at court, you can laugh near the Queen, but never about the Queen. Your last glimpse of her is through a half-open doorway. She's gazing into a polished mirror, adjusting a red-stained ribbon at her neck. Her mouth moves slightly, muttering something to herself. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. But there's no hint of shame in her reflection. This is who she is. The Virgin Queen, sugar-toothed and sovereign, smiling through the rot. You move along a narrow passageway, trailing a velvet drape that muffles the air and thickens it. There's a sourness here, less perfume, more meat broth left out too long. You follow your nose through a carved wooden door and enter the royal bathing chamber, though chamber might be generous. It's more like a glorified closet with a basin barely large enough to sit in. And surprise, no one's used it in weeks. You squint at the tub. A shallow copper thing, dulled with age and ringed in a film of dried oils. Dust floats on the surface of the water like breadcrumbs. One of the maidservants sets down a pitcher, shrugs, and walks out. She knows no one's using it. And here's the kicker. Elizabeth II, glorious, untouchable, sovereign of seas and crown, barely bathed. Once a month, if you're being generous. Maybe less. You crouch near the bath and tap the copper. It echoes back at you, hollow and sad. This was considered normal. Bathing, in the Tudor mindset, was dangerous. Warm water opened the pores, they said, and made it easier for illness to sneak in. That belief held strong for centuries. So instead of washing, people just layered. More perfume, more linen, more distractions. Elizabeth, despite her political brilliance, shared this superstition. She reportedly claimed to bathe once a month whether I need it or not. And you get the feeling she meant it. She preferred dry bathing, rubbing her skin with cloth soaked in rosewater or vinegar. It was part ritual, part theatre. No scrubbing, no rinsing, no soap suds. Just delicate dabbing in all the places that needed freshening. Sevens. And here's your fringe fact. She may have used ground eggshells and wine-soaked rags to exfoliate. A kind of medieval spa day, minus the bubbles and soft jazz. You lift one of the cloths lying next to the basin. It's stiff, cracked, smells like old almonds and damp lace. You set it down gently, like it might snap in half. There's a set of metal tongs beside it, maybe for heating the water, but judging by the rust, they haven't been touched in months. Historians still debate how much personal hygiene Elizabeth actually performed herself. Some claim she allowed trusted ladies to clean her, carefully and sparingly. Others argue she insisted on maintaining control, even when it meant skipping entire steps in the bathing process. Either way, it wasn't the relaxing soak you're picturing. The idea of daily showers would have horrified her court. Clean water was scarce, and soap was questionable. Most soaps were made from animal fat and lye, smelling faintly of bacon grease and burning. You sniff a bar left on a shelf and recoil. Definitely not lavender. As you poke around, you notice a stack of undergarments, shifts, linen smocks, folded neatly but clearly reused. In fact, many upper-class Tudors changed their underlayers instead of washing their bodies. Clean linen, they believed, pulled dirt and disease away from the skin. The more shifts you owned, the cleaner you were, or at least, the cleaner you seemed. Elizabeth's wardrobe was legendary. She owned over 1,000 gowns, many of them made from brocade, velvet, and silk. Beautiful, heavy, hot, and utterly unwashable. You begin to understand why bathing was off the table. By the time you removed all those layers, the idea of stepping into cold water seemed, well, rude. One of the maidservants walks by carrying a tray of orange peels and herbs. You watch her scatter the ingredients into a pan of steaming water, then wave the vapour toward a nearby screen. Steam bathing. Sort of. Aromatherapy. Maybe. But you notice the Queen never actually steps behind the screen. She merely breathes in the scent and moves on. The humour writes itself here. Imagine a modern-day spa where the client refuses to touch the bath and just sniffs the eucalyptus. You'd want your money back. But here, that was the money. Smell over substance. The illusion of cleanliness. And speaking of illusion, the Queen's bedding, beautiful, yes, was another battlefield. She reportedly changed her sheets monthly, sometimes longer. Instead, they were dusted with dried herbs, lavender, chamomile, and wormwood. Pleasant at first, until you realise the herbs were there to deter lice, fleas, and bad smells. Your skin itches just thinking about it. You pass a table stacked with folded rags and notice a basin beneath it catching drips from the ceiling. The room is damp, close, never fully dry. Perfect conditions for mould. But again, this was normal. Nobody complained because everyone smelled. You start to grasp that stink wasn't a source of shame. It was just the background noise of existence. A courtier once joked that you could follow the Queen's perfume through the palace before you ever saw her face. That wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. You see a bowl of dried petals near the window, almost decorative, but look closer and you spot the faintest shimmer of oil. It's a potpourri basin, used to mask the smell of skin, silk, and old sweat. Every chamber had one. You imagine guests arriving and immediately clutching a scented handkerchief. They weren't being rude. They were surviving. And here's your comic break. Picture the royal bath staff receiving a once-a-month summons. The Queen is bathing today. Panic ensues. Water must be boiled. Herbs must be crushed. And somewhere, a woman screams because the copper basin has sprouted a spider. A single bath becomes an Olympic event. Even Elizabeth's cosmetics doubled as dirt deflectors. The thick lead paint didn't just cover blemishes, it acted like a sealant. Who needs to wash your face when you can bury it under 3 coats of paste? And that blush. More than a rosy hue, it was a layer between you and the plague. At least, that's what they told themselves. You back away from the tub, grateful you didn't sit in it. You imagine how it felt, stiff and unforgiving, with maybe an inch of tepid water and a floating lavender sprig for effect. Regal? Yes. Refreshing? Absolutely not. By the time Elizabeth climbed into her ornate bed at night, she was wrapped in a cocoon of powder, perfume, and deception. No clean skin, no rinsed hair, just illusion. And as you close the chamber door behind you, you notice something scratched into the wooden frame. It's faint, barely there. A single word, ablua, Latin for to wash. Sevens, you laugh softly. Someone had a sense of humour. You glide down a hallway choked with velvet drapes and echoes of perfume past, only to be greeted by the sharp, sour scent of neck sweat and old starch. That smell? It's coming from the Queen's collar, her infamous ruff. You've seen it in every portrait, that wide, feathered halo fanning out around her face like she's got a dinner plate tucked under her chin. It looks stiff, almost regal, but up close, it's basically a portable sponge for filth. You step into her dressing chamber just as the attendants are removing the day's ruff. It takes 2 women to loosen the laces, gently lifting the frilled linen away from her neck like they're handling a sacred relic. And there it is, the shadow of grime. A pale ring of yellowing sweat stains and leftover powder clings to the inner rim. You stare at it, both fascinated and mildly nauseated. It smells like lavender, iron, and damp lace that's seen too many monarchs and not enough water. The ruff was not a simple accessory. It was a statement, a fortress, and in Elizabeth's case, a daily hygiene hazard. These collars were made of fine linen, starched within an inch of their lives, and shaped using heated irons and bone tools. They stood stiffly around the neck, catching everything: sweat, oil, perfume, spittle, even crumbs. You think back to that slice of quince she ate earlier, and yes, there it is. A tiny smear of fruit on the edge. Fantastic. Here's the problem: cleaning them was nearly impossible. Removing the ruff meant untying intricate cords threaded beneath layers of hair, gowns, and jewels. Washing them risked shrinking or warping the shape. So instead, they were often dusted, aired out, and, if the Queen was lucky, lightly spot-treated. Full washes? Maybe once a season. That's your historical fun fact of the night. Tudor laundry was more like gentle negotiation than actual cleaning. You watch as the chambermaid picks up a stiff bristled brush and begins to freshen the ruff with a dry shake of lavender powder and a few taps of orris root. It's the 16th century version of Febreze. You can practically see the invisible cloud of build-up floating in the air, and you suddenly understand why the courtiers always stood a respectful distance. Now comes the best part, putting the new ruff on. Or, more accurately, the less dirty ruff. It's pulled from a cabinet lined with fragrant herbs and tightly packed linen. The Queen closes her eyes as it's secured in place, her chin tilted up, neck exposed. You notice the skin there, red, chafed, with faint bumps where the last ruff rubbed too long. That heavy lace wasn't just itchy, it irritated the skin until small sores formed. Charming. But here's where things get especially fun. The starch that kept ruff so rigid was often made from fermented wheat or rice water. Yes, fermented. Left to sit and bubble into a thick, reeking paste. The starch was applied by hand, sometimes with a paddle, then dried over hot coals until crisp. If the mixture was off or left too long, it would sour. And guess what? That smell didn't go away. You imagine walking around all day with a bakery's worth of mouldy dough around your neck. Royalty has its perks. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth endured this willingly or merely accepted it as the cost of fashion. Some say she adored the towering ruffs as a symbol of her power, framing her face like a holy relic. Others think it was more political, a visible display of control, order, and rigidity. Either way, the ruff became her signature and her curse. Here's your quirky tidbit for the section. Rumours at court claimed that during one particularly hot summer, a beetle crawled into Elizabeth's ruff mid-audience and couldn't find its way out. She didn't flinch. The audience continued. The beetle? Probably fossilised in there somewhere, wrapped in silk and dried starch. You glance over at a stack of rejected ruffs by the corner, some fraying, some yellowed. One has a tiny burn mark, maybe from the iron or a stray candle. Another bears the unmistakable outline of teeth. Someone must have bitten it in frustration. And there, at the top of the pile, lies a ruff so rigid and stained it could double as a medieval frisbee. Your comic break? Imagine being the poor courtier tasked with complimenting it. Your Majesty, the way your collar frames your head, like a glorious angelic mushroom. You'd be on kitchen duty by morning. Now you look closer at the fastening system. It's shockingly complex. Long, fine strings called points are used to attach the ruff to the bodice or undergarment. Tie them too tight, and the Queen can't turn her head. Too loose, and it droops, an unforgivable sin. There's an entire job devoted just to adjusting these things. You picture a ruff technician hunched in the corner, silently cursing their life choices. And just when you think you've grasped the full nightmare, you see the sweating, powdered neck again. Elizabeth stands, adjusts her shoulders, and walks stiffly to the mirror. The ruff flares like a paper crown, pristine on the outside, but you now know the truth. It's a lacy prison soaked in sweat, starch, and pride. She smiles faintly. Her teeth peek out again. You resist the urge to duck. One of her ladies brings over a small silver bottle and gently sprays the ruff with rose water. A refreshing touch, or maybe just another layer of camouflage. The Queen lifts her head, turns slightly left and right. She looks powerful, imposing, elegant, and also like she hasn't been able to scratch her neck since last Tuesday. You quietly exit the chamber, ducking beneath a tapestry stitched with the Tudor rose. Behind you, the ruff sits high and proud. A symbol. A lie. A wheezing, mildew-scented testament to the fact that sometimes elegance comes with an odour. The next room is hushed, warm, and overwhelmingly heavy with the scent of silk, sweat, and onions? No, worse. Onions and perfume. You pause at the threshold of Elizabeth's wardrobe chamber, only to be nudged aside by two maids hauling in a gown so wide it nearly sweeps an entire candle off its sconce. And that gown? It's standing upright on its own. Not because of structure, because of stiffness. This dress has absorbed things. You edge closer and immediately feel the heat trapped inside the room. There's no breeze, no open windows, just layers upon layers of fabric. Silks, brocades, velvets, all hanging like decadent ghosts. They sway slightly as you walk past, and you can smell the years. Not centuries-old preservation, but last week's dinner, last month's sweat, and yesterday's attempt at masking it with rose oil and clove water. Elizabeth's gowns weren't just extravagant, they were battleships. Each one weighed between 20 to 40 pounds, with stiff boning, padded hips, and metal thread embroidery that clung to moisture like a sponge. Imagine layering that on top of thick wool undergarments, a corset, petticoats, and shift after shift, all of it unwashed for weeks. You feel claustrophobic just thinking about it. And here's your mainstream historical nugget. The Queen owned over 1,000 dresses. Many were gifts, some were diplomatic displays, and others were made for the sheer purpose of impressing or intimidating foreign envoys. The wardrobe alone was a symbol of wealth, dominance, and divine femininity. But every symbol comes at a price, and hers was boiled armpits. You see one of her ladies now, struggling to lace up the back of a gown. Elizabeth stands arms out, posture rigid, as the stays are pulled tighter and tighter. With each tug, you watch her chest rise, fall, then rise again. Breathing becomes a conscious act. Underneath the corset lies a chemise, probably damp from yesterday, and beneath that, nothing freshly laundered. The underlayers were rarely washed. They were aired out, flapped in the breeze, and, if you were lucky, dusted with dried herbs to keep the worst of it at bay. Here's your fringe detail. Sometimes these gowns would be lined with scented wax tablets, or even sewn in pockets of spices. Clove, cinnamon, lavender, your royal bee. Oh, repellents. But under all that finery, the sweat just soaked in. You spot a corner of fabric near her underarm that's permanently stained darker than the rest. It shines slightly in the candlelight. Yeah, that's not embroidery. Now consider this. Elizabeth could change outfits several times a day. Morning gown, midday audience gown, hunting gown, dinner dress. All of them layered, all of them sweaty, all of them trapping body heat like a well-seasoned Dutch oven. And yet, none of these outfits were ever truly washed. Washing fine silks and brocades risked destroying the fabric. Instead, the outer garments were brushed, perfumed, or simply rotated out of sight. Filth became performance art. Historians still argue whether she ever wore the same gown twice in public. Some believe she reused pieces discreetly, especially during the early years of her reign. Others think she had enough variety to avoid repeats altogether. Either way, re-wearing didn't mean re-washing. That was too risky, too laborious, and way too low on the Tudor priority list. As you move deeper into the room, you pass a mannequin dressed in one of her iconic gowns. Crimson velvet, lined with pearls, stiffened with whale baleen. You give it a gentle nudge. It doesn't move. The thing could survive a blizzard, but inside, you imagine it radiating the heat and musk of 4 trapped summers. One of the ladies glides by, dragging a long plume of fabric behind her. You hear her murmur about the Queen's swamp back, and you can't help but smirk. Even royalty suffers the indignities of sweat trickling down the spine beneath 6 layers of brocade. For comic relief, imagine one of those royal processions, slow and grand, the Queen flanked by noblemen holding up her train. They're all gasping quietly for air, one of them pale from standing downwind, and another subtly trying to dab his nose with a gloved hand. But they carry on, faces noble, as if hauling a cloud of fleur de filth is a sacred duty. And then there's the foot sweat. You glance downward, at her pointed shoes, delicate, gold-threaded, and completely sealed. No breathability, no ventilation. You imagine what it's like after a full day's wear. Feet marinating in damp silk stockings, sliding slightly with each step. The shoes are never aired out, just wiped clean and stored, trapping the moist little secrets of monarch life inside. You step toward a nearby cabinet where maids keep sachets, tiny cloth bundles filled with powdered herbs. These are tucked between garments to absorb moisture and smells. You peek inside one. It's nearly blackened with use. So much for freshness. The Queen finishes changing. Her new gown crackles as she walks, the layers rubbing together like parchment. You trail her to a mirror, watching as she adjusts her bodice, pats her sleeves, and turns slowly to inspect the fit. She looks magnificent. A walking tapestry. A human cathedral. And yet, beneath it all, she's stewing. You think of all the portraits that immortalise her elegance, clean, glowing, untouchable. But behind every brushstroke, you now see a sheen of perspiration, the crust of last week's rosewater, and a dash of panic from the poor soul who forgot to stuff the gown with sage leaves that morning. And finally, your scholarly debate for this section. Some historians suggest Elizabeth's fashion served as a deliberate distancing tactic. If people focused on her grandeur, they wouldn't question her body. Others argue she simply followed courtly expectations. Either way, her dresses weren't just attire. They were armour. Gilded, glamorous, and absolutely swampy. You step out of the wardrobe room, skin prickling with the ghost of all that heat. Behind you, the Queen stands tall, poised, the very image of majesty. And under it all, she's slowly melting. You make your way down a spiralling stone stairwell, stepping gingerly over what you hope is just dried mud. The air grows cooler, damper, and unmistakably fouler. You're descending into the part of the palace where elegance stops pretending. The part where Elizabeth's court quite literally dumps its problems. You arrive at the royal garderobe. No, not a closet full of ruffs and corsets. This is the Tudor toilet system. Primitive, pungent, and far more public than you'd expect. And for a queen who lived in constant pursuit of control and image, this setup is jarringly crude. The royal toilets were little more than holes in benches, placed over chutes or brick shafts that dumped straight into the palace moat, or, in some cases, a pit that had to be emptied by hand. You lean over cautiously, peering into one such hole. It's deep, dark, and absolutely crawling with, well, let's call them historical consequences. And there it is. The palace smell you couldn't quite name before. A mix of stagnant water, human waste, ammonia, damp stone, and desperation. It wafts through the corridors like an invisible courtier. Perfume can only do so much. You watch as a servant passes by carrying a pewter pot, its lid clinking just enough to make you uncomfortable. Chamber pots were a way of life, especially for royalty. Elizabeth didn't always use the guardrobe. Often, she relieved herself in a personal close stool, essentially a portable throne with a padded seat and a removable bucket. It was kept in her private quarters, attended to by her most trusted ladies. You know you've reached peak intimacy when someone's job is to empty your waste and do it with grace. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The groom of the stool was one of the most prestigious positions in court. Yes, you heard that right. The person responsible for managing the Queen's toileting needs had direct, daily access to her most private moments, and thus held immense political power. You imagine the first day on that job. Here's your scoop, your ladle, and your royal favour. Don't mess it up. 7s. The stools were often covered in velvet, embroidered with the Queen's cipher, and scented with herbs tucked into little drawers beneath the seat. Yet no matter how much you dress it up, it's still a poop chair. And here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth reportedly suffered from bouts of constipation, likely made worse by her diet and sedentary lifestyle. When things got backed up, they turned to remedies like boiled prunes, ale-soaked oats, or even, brace yourself, syringes of warm oil applied with a leather-bladdered enema. You're not sure what's worse, the tool or the poor soul operating it. You step into a narrow alcove and immediately gag. This chute connects to one of the old guardrobes, still in use, judging by the unfortunate puddle on the floor. You try not to breathe too deeply. Instead, you study the wall. A faint script is carved into the stone, possibly by a bored servant. It reads, "The Queen's silence is thine honour." You assume that's about discretion, or maybe a passive-aggressive reminder not to gossip while she's in the stall. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth used the public guardrobes in emergencies or avoided them entirely. Some believe she refused to descend into these foul-smelling chambers unless absolutely necessary. Others argue that during long palace stays, especially in old castles with less than ideal plumbing, she had no choice. Either way, she wouldn't have gone alone. Privacy was impossible. At least one attendant was always near, ready to hand over a cloth, a scented pouch, or simply turn her head and pretend this wasn't happening. And here's your joke for the section. Imagine being a visiting noble from Spain, shown around the palace and proudly presented with the Queen's toilet stool. Marvellous design, you'd murmur, nose twitching, while plotting your escape back to the fresh air of literally anywhere else. But don't let the stool fool you into thinking things ended neatly. Waste had to go somewhere, and in Elizabeth's time, that somewhere was usually the moat. Yes, the very body of water that reflected the castle's grandeur was also its latrine. A bubbling soup of waste, animal remains, and who knows what else. The smell would rise in summer, creeping into the lower chambers and kitchens like a warning from below. You imagine the Queen walking by a window, catching a whiff, and snapping her fan shut just a little harder than usual. And this wasn't unique to Elizabeth's court. It was the standard. Most castles and palaces had primitive waste systems, and waste management was literally manual labour. Night men, or gong farmers, would arrive under cover of darkness to empty cesspits, hauling human refuse out by the bucket. You picture one now, gaunt, bleary-eyed, with a cloth over his mouth, dragging a sloshing barrel down the corridor. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody asked questions. Back in Elizabeth's chambers, you notice a bowl of crushed herbs near the stool. Marjoram, rosemary, thyme. They were used to scent the room, but mostly they were there to be held under the nose when things got too real. The Queen may have been tough, but even she had a gag reflex. You hear giggles echoing from above. Somewhere, a lady-in-waiting is joking about the Queen's thunder. You smirk. Even in a world of heavy robes and lead-based makeup, fart jokes reign eternal. And then, as you pass by the final guardrobe chamber, you spot something both absurd and brilliant. A fan made of feathers, mounted on a stick, sitting beside the stool. A maid gives it a gentle spin. It's meant to stir the air. You nearly applaud. Before you go, here's your scholarly debate. Some historians argue Elizabeth's infamous public modesty was all a show, that in private, she was surprisingly relaxed about bodily functions. Others insist she maintained rigid composure even behind closed doors. Whichever version is true, one thing's certain. She had no choice but to exist in a world where glamour and grime coexisted without apology. You finally retreat from the depths, stomach unsettled, nose assaulted, respect. Oddly increased. Because if Elizabeth could rule an empire with one hand on a velvet cushion and the other gripping a perfumed rag, then truly, she was unstoppable. Behind you, the toilet chambers sit quiet once more. Still. Stewing. Regal in their own horrifying way. You're barely out of the guardrobe before your scalp begins to itch. Not metaphorically. Not from nerves. It physically itches. And as you climb the stone steps back into the Queen's privy chamber, you realise why. This isn't just the scent of dust, silk, or perfume clinging to the tapestries. This is something smaller, more alive, and probably hiding in the hairline of everyone in the room. Welcome to the royal ecosystem, where lice are constant, mice are casual, and superstition guides more health decisions than actual science. You spot Elizabeth seated near the hearth, sipping something steaming from a delicate porcelain cup. She's surrounded by her ladies, all whispering and gently scratching, like it's just part of the daily choreography. The Queen herself doesn't flinch, but you see it, the soft motion of a fingernail sneaking under her wig cap, the subtle shiver of relief. She's not immune. No one is. The wigs you've already met. You remember the smell, but what you didn't see until now were the tiny, near-invisible combs scattered across her vanity, ivory, fine-toothed, and gleaming in the firelight. Not for styling, for catching. Lice were so common at court they were practically pets. Head-scratchers, one courtier called them. Court companions, joked another. The Queen's attendants checked her hair daily, under the wigs, behind the ears, near the nape. Anything moving got plucked or scraped. Your historical fact for the night. During the Elizabethan period, lice were not just tolerated, they were expected. Most people shaved their heads regularly to manage them, especially under heavy wigs or hoods. Elizabeth likely did the same. Her real hair, once famously red, had thinned dramatically. Beneath the wigs, her scalp was probably smooth, pale, and constantly irritated from powders, pins, and the occasional visitor with 6 legs. And it doesn't stop with lice. No, now you see them, tiny grey streaks darting along the baseboards. Mice. You follow one with your eyes as it boldly scampers across the carpet, sniffs at a fallen crumb, and disappears into the hem of a forgotten gown. No one screams. No one even blinks. Palaces weren't sealed fortresses. They were breathing, leaking, creaking ecosystems. The Tudor court teemed with life. Lice, fleas, flies, and mice all made themselves at home. Even rats, though less welcome, were a known part of palace life. You try not to think about them nesting in the linen stores. Or worse, in the Queen's wardrobe. And here's your fringe detail. Elizabeth kept small lapdogs, pocket-sized spaniels, meant not just for companionship but also to attract fleas away from her body. These flea magnets were essentially biological bait. You spot one now, curled on a cushion near the fire. It's twitching in its sleep, likely scratching at something. Royal or not, this pup's got problems. You edge closer to one of the handmaids brushing out a fur-lined cloak. She pauses, taps the lining, and casually flicks away a louse. Then she dabs the edge with lavender water. No panic. No shrieking. Just pest control, 1500 style. One maid leans in toward another, whispering behind her hand. They're debating something. You catch snippets, moon phases, heat in the blood, signs in the Queen's dreams. They're not talking about medicine. They're talking about superstition. Because when it came to health and cleanliness, the Elizabethan court put more faith in folklore than in facts. Here's your scholarly debate. Some historians believe Elizabeth herself consulted astrologers and dream readers for medical advice. Others argue her decisions were shaped more by tradition than belief. But one thing's clear: she lived in a world where health was dictated by omens, humours, and old wives' tales passed down through generations. One superstition claimed that lice were a sign of vitality, and to be free of them meant illness was near. Yes, having lice meant you were healthy. Let that sink in while you scratch your head. As you approach Elizabeth's writing desk, you notice the lace collar she wore earlier lying crumpled beside an open book. Something moves beneath it. You freeze. Another mouse? No, just a beetle, scuttling out from the folds and vanishing into the shadows. You're not sure if you should be more disturbed by its presence, or by the fact that no one seems to care. Elizabeth sighs and dips her quill into a pot of ink. Her fingers are elegant, ink-stained, and dotted with faint red spots, bug bites, maybe, or irritation from her gloves. Her attendants hover nearby, one holding a bowl of rose water to rinse her hands, another offering a cloth. You watch as she wipes, dabs, then returns to her letter. The same cloth is handed off, barely rinsed, and folded for later use. Your comic moment. A page boy stumbles in, scratching so furiously at his head that his cap tips sideways. A lady glares at him, whispers something sharp, and he freezes. Go. Delouse. Now. He scurries off. You chuckle quietly. Public shame is a powerful motivator. You glance toward the Queen again. Her expression is composed. Her wig is pristine, powdered, regal. But under the table, her foot taps. A nervous tick? Or maybe something just bit her. You move past a cabinet filled with sachets and tinctures. Each one promises something. Warding off plague, attracting suitors, calming nerves, curing itches. Most of them smell vaguely of vinegar and regret. You pick one up, rat's tail soaked in rosemary. You set it down. Immediately, in the far corner, a window stands ajar to air out the chamber. You peer outside and see what looks like another servant tossing what might be old linens, possibly crawling, into a pit to be burned. You wonder if any of those belong to Elizabeth. Then again, you kind of hope they did. You finally understand something crucial. In a palace this ornate, the filth didn't just hide in the shadows. It thrived in plain sight. The Queen didn't live despite the grime. She reigned within it. She and her ladies learned to manage the itch, the scratch, the rustle underfoot. And as you retreat, still twitching with imaginary bugs, one final thought hits you. In Elizabeth's court, beauty wasn't about cleanliness. It was about endurance. You didn't look fresh. You looked unbothered, which, considering she was probably crawling with something half the time, is pretty impressive. You re-enter the Queen's dining chamber, where silver platters glint beneath flickering candlelight, and roasted meats shimmer with juices thick enough to make the walls sweat. You almost forget you're in the middle of a Hygiene horror show, until you spot the Queen delicately plucking a pigeon leg from her plate. With her fingers, not a fork, not a spoon, certainly not a napkin in sight. Just fingers, gloved or bare, coated in the day's royal grime. You watch as she brings the morsel to her mouth, chews thoughtfully, and sets the half-gnawed bone back down, right onto the embroidered tablecloth. You shudder. Welcome to the age of unwashed hands and table manners that would terrify a modern germaphobe. It hits you then. Hand-washing wasn't a thing. At least, not in the way we understand it. In Elizabeth's court, water was scarce, soap was harsh, and the idea of scrubbing off invisible bacteria was centuries away. People believed in visible dirt. If your hands looked clean, they were clean. Maybe you'd give them a quick dab with a perfumed cloth, or dip them in rose water before a feast, but actual soap and scrubbing? That was for butchers and laundresses. Elizabeth's fingers, elegant though they may be, have touched parchment, ink, sceptre, wig, dog. and probably a small mouse today. And now, they're touching your pheasant pie. Bon appetit. Your historical fact for this evening. Even the grandest banquets in Elizabethan England involved fingers. Diners used personal knives, hands, and the occasional spoon for broths. Forks were still rare in England, seen as overly foreign and fussy. Elizabeth reportedly owned a few decorative ones, but never used them. Her fingers were the original royal cutlery. You spot a nearby servant lifting a silver basin, offering it ceremonially to the Queen. She dips her fingertips in and dabs with a towel, not to clean, but to freshen. This was the Tudor version of sanitation. More symbol than substance. The water in the basin isn't even changed between guests. You try not to think about the backwash of grease, ink, and nail gunk floating in it like a royal stew. Here's your fringe tidbit. Nail cleaning tools did exist, little scrapers made of bone or metal. Elizabeth may have used one, though probably not daily. After all, long nails were a sign of nobility. If your hands were soft and adorned, it meant you didn't labour. You just carried the germs of others. The dining table is stunning. Pewter goblets, gilded candlesticks, fresh-cut flowers. But beneath the surface, it's a battlefield. You notice grease trails on the fabric, tiny crumbs jammed into embroidered seams, and the faint shimmer of something sticky under a spoon. Servants rotate dishes with practiced grace, often licking their fingers between tasks. You blink. Did that just happen? Yes. Yes, it did. And now comes the fruit course, plums, apples, and pomegranate seeds. Elizabeth bites into an apple with the enthusiasm of someone whose teeth should not be doing this. A spurt of juice glistens on her chin. She dabs it with her sleeve. The same sleeve she just used to pat her dog. The same dog that scratched itself raw moments ago. You chuckle. There's a joke in here somewhere. Maybe something like, she conquered the Spanish Armada but couldn't conquer a napkin. Sevens. One of the court physicians enters briefly to observe the Queen's appetite. He nods approvingly. Eating heartily meant good health. Hygiene, not part of the checklist. If anything, concern about sanitation was seen as the weakness, a sign that your humours were imbalanced or your spirit too delicate. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth had any awareness of germ theory-style hygiene. Most say no. Bacteria wouldn't be discovered until long after her reign. But some suggest she intuited that cleanliness mattered, at least socially. She demanded order, cleanliness of dress, and perfumed surroundings, even if actual cleanliness didn't make the cut. You sidle past the musicians in the corner, trying not to step on a dropped chicken bone. One lute player absently scratches his nose with a grease-slicked finger. You turn away. Here's your comic beat. A young page drops a platter. A roast swan skids across the floor, its golden-brown skin gleaming as it collects floor dust and dog hair. The page freezes. Everyone watches. Then the servant scoops it up, straightens his cap, and places it back on the table like nothing happened. You nearly applaud. Then there's the question of food storage. You peek toward the open door leading into the pantry and smell. Trouble. The palace kitchen tried its best, but refrigeration didn't exist. Meats were salted, smoked, or buried in spices. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it fermented. The Queen, lucky as always, got the best cuts. But even those could be dicey. Food poisoning happened. People just called it bad humours, or the flux. Sevens. And yet, no one stops eating. The court thrives on spectacle. Roasted peacock in full feather, pies with live birds inside, towers of sugar sculptures no one dares touch. It's a parade of opulence built on questionable sanitation. Elizabeth loved it. Every extravagant meal reinforced her dominance. No one questioned her fingers, her breath, her plate. She was above bacteria. Still, You can't help but stare as she reaches for a final morsel, some glazed fig or nut-stuffed date, before licking the syrup from her thumb. The royal thumb, drenched in the day's sweat, dust, and ceremonial ink. You look around. No one even blinks. The table clears. Cloths are pulled. The same cloth, it seems, used again and again. You watch it fold, stained and crumpled, and imagine the week's worth of meals living in its fibres. Elizabeth rises, regal even in digestion, and dabs her mouth with a scented kerchief that's clearly seen better days. You follow her out as servants descend like vultures to scrape leftovers into waiting basins. One maid casually eats a fig off a guest's plate. Another slips a chunk of meat into her apron. You spot a third using the edge of her sleeve to wipe the Queen's wine cup for tomorrow. And here's your closing thought for this section. Elizabeth didn't live outside her own grime. She danced through it, licked it from her fingertips, and dared anyone to mention it. Cleanliness wasn't holiness in her court. Presence was. And her presence? Immaculate, no matter how sticky her fingers. You're barely done processing the chaos of finger-licking royalty when a dense fog of sweet, musky perfume hits you in the face like a velvet slap. It sneaks in under doors, coils up from cushions, and hovers like a fragrant ghost over every surface. You've just entered the Queen's bedchamber, but don't expect tranquility. This room doesn't whisper, it wheezes. The scent is overwhelming. Not in a light spritz of lavender way. This is an all-out olfactory assault. Rose, clove, musk, sandalwood, frankincense, and something sharper, like aged citrus rotting politely. You try to take a deep breath and immediately regret it. It's like inhaling inside a powdered wig drawer. This isn't indulgence. It's defence. Elizabeth the Founder, like the rest of her court, lived in constant dread of one thing above all. Plague. The Black Death still haunted every alley and chamber. If a cough echoed wrong, or a rat scurried too boldly, everyone assumed the end was nigh. And since they believed disease travelled through bad smells, miasmas, as they called them, perfume became armour. Your historical fact: Elizabeth's court used perfume not just as a luxury but as medicine. They believed that sweet-smelling air repelled disease, and foul odours attracted it. So, the Queen didn't just wear perfume, she marinated in it. You spot one of her handmaidens shaking powdered orris root onto the bed linens. Another sprinkles dried rose petals into her slippers. There's even a bowl of perfumed vinegar resting beside the chamber pot, a charming contradiction if you've ever seen one. You peer toward the bed, high, canopied, and stuffed with so many embroidered pillows it looks more decorative than functional. Every inch of the fabric is laced with fragrance. And beneath the glamour, the mattress is probably hiding months of accumulated sweat, oils, and the odd flea. But hey, it smells like roses. So it's fine, right? Your fringe tidbit for this section. Some of Elizabeth's handkerchiefs were infused with ambergris, a waxy substance from a sperm whale's intestines that was so prized it cost more than gold. It smelled musky, sweet, and bizarrely attractive. And yes, she sniffed it regularly. Imagine blowing your nose into a whale's digestive mystery and calling it luxury. You step toward her writing desk, where a small cabinet is open. Inside are bottles, vials, and pomanders, tiny metal globes stuffed with dried herbs and resins. These were worn around the neck, held close to the face, or hidden in sleeves. Each one was a mobile disease shield, clinking gently as the Queen moved about her court. One is cracked open on the desk now, spilling powdered cinnamon and dried violet petals onto the parchment. You glance at the hearth, where something odd is smouldering in a bowl. It's fern smoke, used to purify the air. The smell is acrid, earthy, like burning hay with ambition. You can barely breathe, but Elizabeth sits nearby reading, eyes unblinking, nostrils delicately flared. She's in her element. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly believed in the miasma theory, or simply followed court fashion. Either way, she never took chances. Whenever plague rumours crept into London, she relocated immediately, sometimes ordering everyone in the palace to douse themselves in perfumes daily. It wasn't optional. Smell bad, and you might be blamed for death. And here's your comic break. Imagine being a courtier late to a perfume inspection. You grab whatever you can, maybe some floral ink or a dab of goose fat with mint, and hope it's enough to pass the sniff test. One unlucky noble, legend says, once passed out after overpowdering his sleeves, glamorous and unconscious. You lean closer to the Queen's vanity, where a small dish of perfumed salve rests. It's thick, greasy, and faintly gold-tinted, likely a blend of rose oil, beeswax, and crushed herbs. This wasn't just moisturiser, it was a second skin, applied to lips, temples, and occasionally under the arms. It masked not just odour, but irritation. You dip a finger in and instantly regret it. Your fingertips now smell like a soap shop exploded in a beehive. And still, the bugs came. The scents, however lovely, didn't repel everything. Moths feasted on the fragrant fabrics. Flies buzzed around the room, confused by all the conflicting smells. You hear a slap in the corner. One of the ladies just flattened a beetle with her slipper. No one blinks. A lady in waiting enters with a fresh sachet, cloves, thyme, and dried lemon peel, and gently tucks it under the Queen's chair. Then another follows, waving a feather fan dipped in rosewater. It's a full-time job maintaining this olfactory fortress. You wonder how Elizabeth slept in this. Beneath all that fragrance, was there any air left? The answer probably lies in the fan spinning gently on the nightstand. It's carved from ivory, its edges stained from years of oils and soot. She likely slept with it nearby, waving it half-consciously in the night to keep herself cool or sane. As the Queen shifts, you spot something curious. Her neck has a faint rash, reddened just beneath the ear. Too much perfume? An allergic reaction? Or maybe just heat trapped under her ruff and the daily layers of scented wax. You consider suggesting a break from the routine, then remember, this is a woman who thinks clove-stuffed twine is dental hygiene. You're wasting your breath. And here's your closing sensory kicker. You walk past a tapestry hanging near the bed, thinking it might offer a break from the nose assault. Instead, it punches back with a smell so thick you taste it. It's rosemary, sweat, dust, and, beneath it all, the faintest note of old meat. You turn and look at the Queen, still composed, still unreadable. She's been wrapped in this fog her entire life. And now, you're beginning to see why. To live in Elizabeth's world was to breathe in fear, of disease, of decay, of reality. And in that fear, she crafted a throne of fragrance. It didn't make her clean, but it made her untouchable. You leave the chamber with your nostrils stunned, your head spinning, and your jacket faintly perfumed forever. You may never smell anything normally again. You find yourself in the Queen's private solar now, a space meant for quiet reading, soft conversation, and the occasional game of cards, though honestly, the air still smells like last night's rosewater smoke and something faintly tooth-adjacent. Because here's the thing, even in silence, Elizabeth's breath makes its presence known. She sits near the window now, sunlight brushing her painted cheek. She lifts a hand to her mouth, slowly pulling out a length of thread. It's dark, glossy, and oddly fragrant. You blink. It's clove-tied dental twine. Yes, the Queen flosses. Sort of. This isn't modern minty floss. It's more of a spicy shoelace soaked in clove oil, threaded through the teeth to freshen breath and, according to court belief, relieve pain. You watch as she passes it between her teeth delicately, like a cat pulling ribbon through its paws. Her eyes close slightly. Not from pain, but from the relief of masking whatever's happening inside her mouth. And what is happening inside her mouth is grim. You already know her teeth are a mess, rotten, blackened, some gone altogether. But what you hadn't seen up close until now is the full extent of the damage. As she turns her head to speak to a lady in waiting, the light catches the hollow behind her molars. The gum has receded. A black gap yawned wide. And in that moment, you understand why the clove thread matters. It's not just for etiquette. It's survival. Your historical fact. Clove oil was widely used in Tudor times as a dental anaesthetic. Physicians of the era prescribed it to numb toothaches, relieve sore gums, and even freshen foul breath. It worked. Sort of. It masked the symptoms. But the rot. That kept chewing. And speaking of chewing, Elizabeth didn't do much of it. By her later years, most of her meals were soft. Mashed fruits, stewed meats, bread soaked in milk or wine, anything easier on the teeth, hard nuts, apples, or crusty loaves. Those were for younger courtiers with less exposed nerves. You glance at a goblet on the table. It holds what looks like wine, but the colour's off. You lean closer and catch a noseful of vinegar, herbs, and maybe a hint of ginger. It's a rinse, one of her many custom mouthwashes, likely containing red wine, myrrh, and crushed mint. It won't cure anything, but it dulls the pain and coats the tongue enough to allow for diplomacy. And here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth's apothecaries sometimes included powdered coral and burnt rosemary in her dental powders. Mixed with vinegar or honey, it formed a gritty paste meant to polish the teeth. Imagine scrubbing your sensitive gums with seashell sand. Now try smiling through it. Her attendants, ever vigilant, bring over a tiny box. You peer inside. It's filled with dried herbs and wax pellets shaped like chickpeas. They're clove-chewing beads, meant to sit between the cheek and gum to release oils slowly over time. You watch her press one gently into her mouth, her face composed, though her fingers twitch slightly. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's oral hygiene was unusually diligent for her time, or simply desperate. Some say she was obsessive, spending hours tending to her breath and smile. Others believe she gave up in later years, relying entirely on clove and ceremony. But everyone agrees. Her mouth was a battlefield. You observe now as she opens a leather pouch at her side and pulls out a second cloth. She presses it to her lips discreetly. When she lowers it, there's a faint red smear. Blood? Maybe. You spot a fleck of tooth embedded in the corner. Yep, that's blood. You glance away. And here's your comic break. A new courtier enters and, eager to impress, kneels to kiss the Queen's hand. As he leans in, the clove scent punches him in the face. His eyes widen. He stammers something about spicy charm. The Queen smiles slightly, exposing just enough enamel to make his confidence crumble. He doesn't try again. The Queen gestures for her mirror, examining her face from all angles. Her lips are painted in a deep crimson, cochineal and mercury again. But now you understand what it's hiding. Behind that careful layer lies a mouth in rebellion, held together by threads, herbs, and royal defiance. You look at the handkerchief again. Another spot of red has bloomed. Her physician stands nearby, pretending to study a ledger, though he's clearly keeping count. There's a small bottle at his side labelled elixir of elm bark and clove, probably her emergency pain relief. You wonder how often she reaches for it. Hourly? Daily? And how much pain she hides behind her diplomatic smile. You approach the Queen's desk where a letter sits half-finished. It's a reply to a nobleman's request, written in her elegant, sharp script. But smudges mark the lower edge. Fingerprints? Grease? No. Saliva. She's dabbed her lips between sentences. You look around and realise no one in this room, not one lady, not one page, is reacting to any of this. The smell. The blood. The twine. It's part of the tapestry. Routine. A monarch's mouth in decay isn't a crisis. It's part of the job. You admire that, in a way. And here's something most people forget. Elizabeth didn't have to show her teeth. She chose to... Portraits, speeches, banquets. She smiled anyway. Not because she wanted to, but because she refused to appear diminished. Her body could crumble, her teeth could rot, but her image, that stayed sharp. You back away slowly, leaving her to her thread, her rinse, and her ever-bleeding gums. She continues writing, unbothered. The clove lingers in the air, spicy, sweet, slightly medicinal. You're not sure you'll ever smell it again without seeing her face, or her jawline, or that small, dark hole where a molar used to live. It's summer now. The palace is still, the air thick, and everything that can melt has... You step into the Queen's audience chamber and instantly regret it. The heat hits you like a wall, dense, sour, and sweet all at once. The tapestries sag on the walls like tired lungs. The candles look faintly embarrassed to still be burning, and in the centre of it all, seated upright and unmoving, is Queen Elizabeth. Her face is sliding, not metaphorically, not diplomatically, literally. That iconic white mask, the famed mask of youth, is turning into a slow-motion landslide. The white lead paste that covers her skin has softened in the heat. It pools ever so slightly at the corners of her jaw, gathers beneath her earlobes, and threatens, if the temperature climbs any higher, to take flight entirely. You watch a bead of sweat carve a clean trail down her temple, leaving behind a pale streak like a comet tail in reverse. And here comes your mainstream historical fact. Elizabeth's signature look was created with a mixture called ceruse, a compound of white lead and vinegar. It gave her that ghostly, flawless pallor seen in every painting. But lead is heavy, thick, and not remotely designed for summer afternoons in full regalia. You stand quietly, as do her ladies in waiting, all of whom have learned not to comment on the melting. They simply adjust her fan, open a small window, and go about their business. No one dares blot her face. It might peel. And no one dares suggest a break. Elizabeth rules through presence. And today, presence requires pretending your jawline isn't literally evaporating. The Queen shifts, slightly. A flake of paint detaches from her cheek and lands, unnoticed, on her bodice. One maid sees it. She glances around, then delicately flicks it away with a feather. Mission complete. Here's your fringe tidbit. Ceruse wasn't just applied to the face, it was layered onto the neck, chest, and even the hands. Any visible skin was powdered into porcelain submission. And when the body warmed up, the paste cracked like an old fresco. Add mercury-based rouge and lip tint into the mix, and you've got a walking chemistry experiment held together by sweat, pride, and delusion. You move closer to her dressing table and spot the tools of maintenance. Cracked porcelain jars, a tray of rabbit hair brushes, a tin of crushed vermilion, a sliver of a mirror so tarnished it reflects more anxiety than accuracy. There's even a small spoon with dried residue clinging to its edge. She stirs the paste herself sometimes, they say. Likes to get the consistency just right. A maid kneels at her side now, gently waving a fan made of peacock feathers. The Queen does not blink. Her gaze remains fixed on the visiting ambassador droning about trade routes and tariffs. But you can see her clenching one gloved hand under the armrest. It's not the speech. It's the drip. Somewhere, beneath her collarbone, a warm trickle is making its way south. You wonder what it must feel like, wearing death on your skin. Lead poisoning builds slowly. It dulls the senses, weakens the muscles, makes you irritable, fatigued. Elizabeth likely didn't know the full extent of what ceruse was doing to her, but she felt it. The headaches, the fatigue, the raw skin under the mask. Historians still argue whether she noticed the symptoms or blamed them on age, stress, or even sorcery. Some say she doubled down in her later years, layering the paste thicker to hide the damage it caused. Others argue she cut back quietly, relying more on dim lighting and distance. Either way, the damage was done. You peer over her shoulder at a discarded cloth stained with pink and white streaks. She blotted earlier. You can see the makeup's full spectrum, the ghostly white, the blood-bright rouge, and a hint of something beige beneath it all. A glimpse of skin, human, fragile, and possibly screaming. Here's your comic break. Imagine being a court painter tasked with capturing her summer glow. The queen arrives, makeup already melting, and you have to immortalise her as a goddess. Do you paint what you see, or what she wants you to see? You'd probably opt for divine radiance and pray she never looks too closely. Now back to the face. A breeze finally enters the chamber, rustling the tapestry and offering one singular second of relief. The queen's shoulders drop a fraction. The fan speeds up. Her lips, painted in mercury red, have begun to bleed at the corners. Nothing dramatic, just a hint of rawness where the pigment cracked. She doesn't flinch, but you notice her licking the corner subtly. You move toward a nearby sideboard. There, another tin of ceruse sits half open. The surface is hardening. It's got a crust. You touch it and immediately recoil. It's the texture of dried glue, and it smells like vinegar and something metallic, almost bloody. This was applied to her face, every day, and it didn't stop at makeup. The summer heat also played havoc with her clothing. Beneath the gown, linen soaked through, the corset, tightening as her body swells. Stockings, stuck, lace, heavy with perspiration. You'd pity her if she weren't so perfectly poised in her discomfort. A maid whispers something and slips behind a screen. She returns moments later with a second handkerchief, this one sprinkled with orris root. She offers it discreetly. Elizabeth takes it, dabs once. Not her face, her chest, the spot that itches just under the ruff. Her expression never changes. You watch her rise now, preparing to exit the chamber. As she does, a faint shimmer trails along her neck, tiny flecks of lead, glittering like snow. They fall with each step, a quiet cascade of false youth disintegrating onto the floorboards. The illusion peels, but the queen remains. Here's your closing image. Elizabeth, radiant and regal, striding down the corridor in full paint and plume. Behind her, tiny specks of ceruse mark her path like breadcrumbs, evidence of the cost she pays each day just to be seen. She is glowing. She is crumbling. She is legend. The smell hits you even before you enter. It's sharp, metallic, and tinged with something earthy, like damp iron mixed with crushed herbs. You're in one of the smaller chambers now, quiet, curtained off, lit by candles that flicker more from the weight of the room than any real draught. This isn't a dressing room or a reception space. It's where Elizabeth goes when something's wrong. When the balance of her body tips just enough to make the old ritual seem too gentle. This is where the queen comes to bleed. No, not from injury, not from accident. On purpose. You step cautiously around a table laid with linen cloths, folded carefully beside curved blades, glass cups, and thick goose feathers. This is a bloodletting chamber. Or, more generously, the Tudor version of preventative medicine. You look at the array of tools, one rusted lancet catches the candlelight, and you're hit with the realization that this was what medicine looked like at the highest level of power. Your mainstream historical fact. Bloodletting was a cornerstone of Elizabethan medicine. Physicians believed that illness came from an imbalance of the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one? You needed to purge, and the most popular humour to remove was blood. Elizabeth's physicians weren't shy about it. At the first sign of fever, headache, skin rash, or even bad dreams, out came the blade. The queen, despite her status, followed the practice. She wasn't above it. And as you sit in the corner, watching a young barber surgeon prepare a linen strip, you realise this wasn't just tradition. It was survival theatre. Her wrist is bared now. The veins traced, the skin rubbed with vinegar and some vague attempt at numbing herbs. You wince as the blade flashes. It's fast, clinical, a clean line just below the joint. Blood wells up immediately, dark and sluggish. A silver bowl is placed beneath to catch it, steaming faintly in the cool air. You're not alone in your discomfort. One of the maids turns away. Another pretends to cough just a little too loud. But the Queen, stone still. Her eyes are closed, her breathing deep and slow. This is just another ritual to her. Another day, another imbalance corrected with a quiet wound. And here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth reportedly preferred bloodletting from the ankle rather than the arm. She believed it reduced swelling in the legs during hot weather. Some even said she had favourite veins, ones that bled cleaner. You file that away under things you didn't want to know about monarchs. 7s. But not all bleeding was via lancet. Leech therapy still lingered in the Tudor medical toolkit. You look down at a small clay jar by the table. It's half submerged in water, and yes, you can just make out movement inside. A slow, fat squirming. The leeches. Some of them were imported, some caught in local streams. Physicians would apply them to delicate areas, temples, eyelids, behind the ears. Wherever they believed tension and fever might hide, you stare too long. One leech finds the edge of the jar and slithers up. You take a step back. The Queen's bleeding is over now. A cloth is pressed. Another solution, maybe myrrh or wine, is applied to clean the area. It stains red. The maid wraps her wrist gently with linen and lace, tying the end with a bow that feels both dainty and absurd. And here's your joke for the section. Imagine the Queen fainting one day, not from illness, but from too much preventative balance. Ah, yes, the court physician declares confidently. She's too healthy. 7s. You glance at the surgeon. He's wiping the blade clean on what looks like a reused rag. No one flinches. Sterilisation didn't exist yet. You try not to imagine how many people that blade's kissed in the last week alone. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth believed in the science of bleeding or simply tolerated it because it was expected. Some think she doubted the practice but didn't want to show weakness. Others claim she was fully on board, even requesting regular sessions to keep her clear in the head. Either way, she let herself be cut. Repeatedly. That's a kind of trust, or fear, you don't see often. Now the bowl of blood sits unattended on the table. Cooling. Thickening. You lean in despite yourself. It's darker than you expected. Clotted at the edge. You imagine someone tossing it out into the palace garden later, or perhaps smearing it on a pestle to read its thickness for diagnosis. Yes, that was a thing. Blood reading. If it was too thin, you were weak. Too thick, you were inflamed. Too dark, you were cursed. Delightful. You notice the Queen sipping something now. Hot, herbal, dark in colour. Likely a tincture of valerian or dried elderflower, meant to soothe the nerves after the cut. She looks distant. Not pained. Not angry. Just used to it. This is part of her routine. Like the paint. Like the rough. Like the sweetmeats and tooth twine. And then she speaks. Soft. Clipped. A single sentence. Enough. 7s. Everyone in the room freezes. A nod from the physician, a bow from the maid, and the room clears with a practiced swiftness that tells you this happens a lot. You're left alone for a moment as the Queen moves slowly to the mirror. She adjusts her sleeve over the bandage, straightens the line of her bodice, and dabs a drop of rose oil onto her wrist to mask the scent. It's not just about balance. It's about image. And as you step backward, preparing to leave, you glance again at the cloth soaked in her blood, the empty bowl, the tiny jar of leeches still twitching in their bath. You realise that, for all her power, Elizabeth couldn't escape the medical thinking of her time. The Queen bled just like her subjects, often, unnecessarily, and with absolute ceremony. You turn the corner, and behind you, the blood begins to dry. The palace gardens are just beyond the window, blooming in over-perfumed defiance of the stench inside, but you're not outside. Not yet. You've just stepped into the Queen's private sitting room, a place meant for softness, for music, for quiet reflection. And yet, the first thing that hits you is the odd collision of scents. Rose oil and rodent. It's not an obvious smell. Not that sharp bite of a dead rat or the full-on stench of a midden heap. It's subtle, almost grassy, faintly musty, and it's coming from everywhere. From beneath the tapestries, behind the skirting boards, even from under the Queen's cushion, where, you're fairly certain, a mouse just blinked at you before vanishing under her skirt hem. You freeze. Elizabeth does not. This is the thing about the Tudor court. Cleanliness was largely visual. As long as the appearance of freshness was maintained, the truth, what lived behind the lace and beneath the silk, was politely ignored. And so, even now, as rose oil is dabbed on the Queen's pulse points, you know it's only half doing its job. The other half? Fighting a losing battle against the daily invasion of rat droppings. Your historical fact for the hour. Tudor palaces, especially those as old as Hampton Court and Richmond, were architectural Swiss cheese, layers of wood, stone, and open beams that allowed vermin to move freely. It wasn't a question of if there were rats or mice. It was how many. You glance toward the base of a wooden sideboard. Sure enough, there's a scattering of small black specks, rat droppings, likely days old, crushed underfoot by an unsuspecting page or the Queen herself. A handmaid notices. She gently sweeps them aside with a perfumed cloth. Problem solved. And here's your fringe tidbit. Rose oil, Elizabeth's favourite fragrance, was expensive not just because of its floral delicacy, but because of how hard it was to make. It took nearly 60 Halon rose petals to distill a single ounce of pure oil. The Queen used it liberally, not just for scent, but to cover mould, sweat, and yes, the occasional rodent trace. You watch now as one of her maids unpacks a folded linen throw. It's beautifully embroidered with gold thread. She places it over the back of the Queen's chair and smooths it down. A moment later, she stops. Cautiously, she lifts the edge. You see it too. A small trail of droppings, perfectly aligned like musical notes. The Queen shifts her weight. Something crunches faintly under her heel. The room holds its breath. Then, as if choreographed, another maid glides in with a brazier of smouldering herbs. Rosemary, cedar, wormwood. Smoke curls through the air, theatrical and pungent. It's not just to refresh the space, it's to drive out the rats. Or at least, confuse them. And now, the comic moment. One of the Queen's lapdogs chases something beneath a dresser, yaps once, and backs away rapidly, tail between legs. A rustle follows. Possibly a rat. Possibly something larger. The dog returns to its cushion and pretends none of it ever happened. The Queen chuckles faintly. The chamber laughs. Too hard, maybe. The walls are lined with heavy tapestries, beautifully woven, designed to keep out drafts. They also serve as 5-star rat housing. You peek behind one and find a chewed hole in the corner, just wide enough for a plump rodent. It smells damp, earthy, not entirely offensive, but very not rose. Elizabeth doesn't flinch. She adjusts a pearl earring, lifts her goblet, and sips as though she isn't surrounded by a crumbling, nibble-friendly environment. This is a woman who's learned not just to ignore the filth, but to dominate it. If the rats invade her chambers, so be it. She will sit taller, smell stronger, pretend harder. Historians still argue whether she knew the extent of the infestation. Some say she refused to acknowledge the problem, considering it beneath her. Others believe she directed her staff quietly to trap and poison vermin without making a fuss. Either way, the rats stayed. The rose oil flowed. The pretense remained airtight. You glance at the queen's gown, layers of velvet and fur. The hem is stained slightly. Not from mud. Something darker. You realise with a small lurch that a rat may have run across it. Recently. The stain is still tacky. You look away. A lady-in-waiting enters now with a tray of delicate cakes, rose-flavoured, sugared, unnecessary. She sets it down, then immediately lifts it again as a long-tailed blur vanishes under the tablecloth. She doesn't mention it, just switches trays. New cakes, same rats. And here's a little extra horror. Rats were not just a nuisance. They carried fleas, and fleas carried plague. It's the same chain reaction that decimated cities across Europe just decades earlier. Elizabeth's court feared illness more than any political enemy. Yet here they were, cohabitating with the very agents of disease, wrapped in silk and denial. The Queen leans forward slightly to inspect a piece of needlework. You notice she's sitting slightly askew, favouring one side. Could be comfort. Could also be that a sachet of dried herbs was placed beneath the cushion to mask the scent of something that died in there last week. You glance up. A bat. Yes, a bat is hanging from the high beams above. No one's noticed. Or they have, and they've agreed not to discuss it. The Queen hums softly under her breath. The room sways with unspoken tension. Here's your scholarly debate. Some argue that Elizabeth, despite her obsession with courtly order and visual perfection, simply didn't equate pest presence with royal failure. Others say she was deeply disgusted but knew it was a battle she couldn't win, so she leaned into elegance instead of cleanliness. The truth likely lies, as always, somewhere in the middle, probably with a rat chewing on the truth's shoelace. You move toward the door, grateful for the growing breeze. Behind you, the Queen takes a slice of candied orange, lifts it to her nose, inhales the rose sugar aroma, and smiles. A servant sneezes. A mouse scurries. The room sighs. And beneath it all, droppings, rose oil, and the quiet pitter-patter of uninvited guests who never get formally introduced. You're in the Queen's chambers again, standing near a towering cabinet stuffed with folded linens, lace collars, and an ungodly number of shifts, those long undergarments that never see daylight but know everything. You reach out, brush the edge of one sleeve, and immediately draw back. It's damp. Not freshly laundered damp. Marinated damp. The kind of damp that's been simmering between layers of wool and velvet for 3 days and 3 royal processions. And that's just the Queen's. You haven't even met the maids yet. They pass you now, ghosting between duties like haunted chandeliers. Hair pulled back, faces pale, expressions unreadable. But as you lean in, just slightly, you catch it. The wall of human odour trailing behind them. It's a quiet, relentless thing. Not offensive exactly, just saturated. Like oversteeped tea made from armpits and starch. Here's the thing no one wants to say. Even the Queen's inner circle stinks. You're not surprised, are you? These women, the Queen's closest attendants, her maids of honour, her bedchamber servants, rarely bathed. And when they did, it wasn't with soap and bubbles and self-care playlists. It was more like rubbing damp linen across the underarms and hoping last week's sweat had plans to leave. They changed their underclothes more often than their outer layers, but even that was limited by availability. Linen was expensive. Time was precious. And, let's be honest, priorities were different. Your historical fact. Most Tudor women, regardless of status, believed that water opened the pores and allowed sickness in. They avoided full-body washing. Instead, dry bathing with cloths and scented powders was the norm, even among royalty. And if that was the Queen's standard, the maids did less. One of them brushes past you now, adjusting a wooden bowl filled with pressed lavender sachets. The hem of her shift peeks out beneath her gown. It's grey, not from dye, but from where? She tucks it back in quickly, but not before you spot the edge of what looks like a wine stain. Or something worse. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some ladies in waiting used cut pieces of cloth, called clouts, during their menstruation, but these were reused, rinsed only lightly, and often stored in corners of the wardrobe between cycles. You blink, then notice a faint trail of dried rose petals leading to the back of a cedar trunk. You decide not to open it, but you do peek inside a nearby linen chest. It's lined with layers of dried herbs, sage, rosemary, and something citrusy. That's not just for fragrance. It's there to fight off the moths, lice, and, well, the smell. These chests weren't for daily use. They were sanctuaries of almost clean fabric, rotated in and out as needed, never truly laundered, just aired, perfumed, hoped for. One maid sits near the window now, brushing out her hair with a bone-handled comb. You notice the shine of oil, maybe rosemary, maybe goose fat. Her scalp is red in places, possibly irritated, possibly just unwashed. The brush looks familiar, as in not uniquely hers. You wonder how many hands and scalps have shared it. And here's your comic moment. Another maid drops a bundle of linen, bends over to grab it, and lets out a groan. Her corset creaks audibly. 5 layers deep, she mutters, and not one of them fresh. You choke on a laugh and pretend to study a shelf. Maids were meant to be invisible, silent, efficient, but in truth, they were everywhere, and they carried the weight and the scent of the Queen's world on their backs. They dressed her, undressed her, wiped her face, brushed her teeth, emptied her chamber pot, and all the while, they themselves were fragrant, in the way a cheese is fragrant, and no one talked about it. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth cared or simply endured. Some say she demanded a certain standard of grooming from her ladies. Others suggest she turned a blind nose. After all, if everyone smells, no one smells. Court life was a great equalizer that way. Perfume didn't elevate anyone, it just helped them survive each other. You watch one maid rub a mixture of crushed cloves and vinegar onto her armpits. It's almost sweet. Almost. Another uses a slice of lemon on her neck. She flinches. The acid stings, but it's all she has. And then there's the youngest, who reaches beneath her gown with a cloth. You hear the squish of damp linen against skin. No shame. No privacy. Just routine. You look down at your own hands. You've touched a lot today. Wigs. Wigs with mice. Tooth twine. Dung-smeared ruffs. Rat trails. Now you're wondering what exactly lives under your fingernails. You eye a nearby bowl of rose water, dunk your fingers in, and realise it's been used multiple times. There's a floater. You back away. The Queen enters briefly, inspecting the work. One of the maids straightens. Another freezes. Elizabeth doesn't comment on the air, doesn't wrinkle her nose, doesn't sniff. She simply nods, selects a fan, and departs. You notice the maid she passed has a bead of sweat trailing down her temple. It vanishes into her collar. No one wipes it. And here's your scholarly debate. Some historians believe the Queen kept her inner circle close and less than clean on purpose. It bred loyalty, intimacy, a sense of shared suffering. Others argue it was simply a reflection of the times, and she tolerated the smell because she had to. Either way, these women weren't just part of her routine. They were her routine. They carried her secrets, her undergarments, her breath-freshening threads, and their own stink. You head toward the door, past a pile of half-folded linens. A rat tail disappears beneath the hem of a forgotten shift. A rose sachet tumbles to the floor. The maid coughs into her sleeve and keeps folding. Behind you, the air hangs heavy, not with disgrace, just the truth. And the truth smells like old sweat, cloves, and quiet loyalty. The Queen's slippers are waiting, set neatly at the edge of her dressing bench, gleaming gold-threaded things with curled toes and velvet insoles. They look divine, regal, like something that belongs on a stained-glass window, not attached to human feet. You take one cautious step closer, and the illusion collapses faster than a Tudor alliance. They stink. Not from across the room, no. This is an up-close revelation. A sharp, bitter tang that shoots straight to the back of your throat the moment you kneel down to peek inside. The Queen's dainty shoes are lined with days, possibly weeks, of sweat. Not just moisture, but fermented foot funk that has soaked through silk, leather, and royal denial. You rise quickly. The smell clings. Elizabeth steps into view now, still in her shift, reaching for a brocaded gown. One of her maids crouches and gently slides the slippers onto her bare feet. You glance away, not because of modesty, but because you're afraid of what you'll see. Fungus, cracked heels, raw spots where the skin has been rubbed thin by leather that's never had a break. Your historical fact. Footwear in the Tudor era was rarely cleaned, and almost never breathable. Stockings were wool or silk, depending on status, but always warm. Shoes were made of leather, velvet, even cloth, but they didn't include ventilation or support. Feet were encased, sweating, trapped. Royalty meant tight shoes and tighter secrets. Elizabeth's feet bore the full weight of her image, literally. Standing for hours at court, posing for painters, pacing before nobles, all while stuffed into slippers that were built more for admiration than for anatomy. Blisters, bunions, and sores. Likely. She wouldn't complain. She couldn't. Her image had no room for foot troubles. And here's your fringe tidbit. Tudor women sometimes powdered their feet with crushed herbs, sage, myrrh, even dried mint, to mask odour and reduce friction. But in closed slippers, the powders turned to paste. Which, of course, only made things worse. One of the Queen's footstools creaks now as she sits. A maid unlatches her left shoe and pauses. There's a raw spot on the back of Elizabeth's heel, red, slightly swollen. She dabs it quickly with rose vinegar and replaces the shoe. Nothing to see here. You glance at her stockings. They're damp. From sweat or a fresh herbal rinse, it's hard to say. But they're clearly not dry. They wrinkle oddly at the arch, stuck to skin. One toe peeks out, a nail that looks suspiciously dark, possibly bruised, possibly worse. And now, your comic moment. A courtier once wrote that the Queen's feet were as light upon the stones as a nymph of forest air. You imagine that man writing it while trying not to pass out from the smell rising off her train. The poetry of survival. Elizabeth stands again, takes a few steps. The slippers, so delicate in appearance, make a soft squish. You pretend not to hear it. So does the maid. Behind her, a second pair of shoes waits, more formal, meant for state business. One maid holds them at arm's length, as if worried about what might fall out. When Elizabeth switches, she lifts her feet without looking. She never glances down. Maybe because she doesn't want to see. Or maybe because looking would mean admitting something isn't perfect. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth suffered chronic foot ailments. Some suggest she had corns or open sores that required regular care. Others think her famously elaborate footwear was more ceremonial than practical, that she wore simpler shoes in private. But there are no records of pedicures, no salves named in her household ledgers. If her feet hurt, she bore it like she bore everything else, with powdered stoicism. You peek into one of the storage chests near the hearth. It's filled with slippers, some flat, some healed, most curled slightly at the toes. A few are stuffed with dried petals. You lift one cautiously. It's brittle, and the inner sole is stained, half brown, half grey. That's not dirt. That's wear. That's sweat. That's royalty, Tudor style. Nearby, another maid rolls up a cloth meant for wiping feet. It's streaked with faint green, likely from an herbal paste used to soothe swelling. You imagine her applying it nightly, dabbing it under the Queen's arch while Elizabeth reads foreign dispatches aloud. Foot rot meets foreign policy. And just as you're starting to recover your senses, you hear the unmistakable sound of a shoe slipping off with a wet pop. The Queen steadies herself. A maid scrambles. The slipper is retrieved, turned upright, and inspected. Nothing falls out, thankfully, but you can see the fabric inside clinging to the insole like a damp tongue. Here's a moment of pure absurdity. One of the royal spaniels waddles across the chamber and sniffs the shoe with great interest. Then it sneezes and trots off. The entire room pretends it didn't happen. You glance down at your own shoes, suddenly grateful they're modern, laced, breathable, functional. Then again, your shoes haven't attended a royal feast, crushed a rat, or made foreign dignitaries bow in their presence. The Queen's slippers have seen things, and stepped in worse. Another pair is set out, this one covered in pearls. Decorative, yes, but those pearls trap dirt like nothing else. You watch a maid try to brush one clean. The dirt smudges. She tries again. The Queen doesn't notice, or doesn't care. And here's your scholarly debate. Some say Elizabeth took immense pride in her appearance, down to the details of her shoes. Others believe she saw them as pure utility, a platform to elevate her image, not an extension of her body. Either way, what lay beneath those slippers remained out of view, unspoken, unwashed. As you leave the room, you hear the faint rustle of stockings against wood floor, and the soft squelch of velvet shoes not quite dry. Behind you, the Queen stands tall, her smile poised, her posture perfect, and on her feet, a moist miracle stitched in gold thread. You're in the Queen's receiving room now, where light filters through high windows and dapples the floor in warm, hazy patches. It's peaceful, almost holy, until a courtier passes by, kneels to kiss Elizabeth's hem, and comes back up with a strand of dog hair on his lip. You suppress a laugh. He does not. The Queen doesn't notice, or pretends not to. Her attention is fixed on her lapdog, currently curled up on a cushion beside her, licking its paw and wagging its tail like it owns the place. And in some ways, it does. Elizabeth's dogs were everywhere. In her chambers, on her bed, under her skirts. And with them came a royal trail of fur, fleas, and, yes, the occasional accidental dung smear. Welcome to the Queen's inner circle. Tight, exclusive, and covered in pet hair. Your historical fact for the moment: Elizabeth I adored small dogs, especially toy spaniels. They were pampered, perfumed, and often wrapped in lace to match her gowns. Portraits show them nestled lovingly by her side, and while they made for adorable accessories, they also left their mark. Literally. You spot a chair by the window, gilded, velvet-lined, and faintly crunchy. A footman shifts it to clean beneath, and out falls a tuft of fur, 2 chewed feathers, and something suspiciously brown and dried. You all pause. The footman nudges it aside with his boot, pretending it's lint. It's not. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some Elizabethan lapdogs were trained to sit inside the Queen's sleeves during colder months. Not beside her, not near her, in her sleeves. You imagine the scene now. Elizabeth addressing Parliament with a small, flea-riddled spaniel tucked under her arm, silently kicking its feet against her ribcage. One of her ladies enters, holding a fresh cushion, this one embroidered with the Queen's initials and what might be a pomegranate. She places it on the floor, smoothing the fabric with careful hands. The dog immediately jumps down, circles it twice, and settles in. It's wearing a pearl-studded collar. Its nails click on the floor like tiny hooves. You kneel beside the chair and spot more fur stuck in the corner seam. And beneath it, a paw print. Dried. Faintly brown. Definitely tracked in from somewhere. You look up to see the Queen reaching for a small tin, some kind of herbal balm. She opens it, dabs a bit onto the dog's nose. Possibly a flea repellent. Possibly just perfume. Possibly wishful thinking. The dog sneezes. A maid appears with a damp cloth and begins dabbing the Queen's sleeve, where the dog's enthusiasm has left a trail of something. Elizabeth holds still. She's done this before. Often. Historians still argue whether these dogs were allowed to sleep in her bed. Some sources insist yes, noting how fond she was of letting them lie across her feet at night. Others suggest she merely allowed them into her chambers, not her bedding. But based on the current situation, fur on the sheets, scratch marks near the posts, you're betting those pups had full royal access. And here comes your comic break. One unlucky ambassador once attempted to flatter the Queen by praising her dog's beauty, only to be bitten on the thumb when he reached to pet it. Elizabeth reportedly laughed. The dog got a treat. The ambassador got a bandage. You approach her writing desk and spot tiny claw marks along one leg. A chew pattern runs halfway up the side. It wasn't a mouse. It was one of the dogs, bored during a long council meeting, gnawing at the furniture while Elizabeth dictated foreign policy. You glance at the dog now. It's dozing, probably dreaming about biting the Ottoman envoy next. Another maid enters with a tiny brush and begins sweeping fur off the Queen's skirts. She's careful not to disturb the embroidery. The Queen doesn't thank her. This is simply protocol. Dog sheds. Maid brushes. Repeat daily. The room smells faintly of rosemary, rosewater, and wet spaniel. Not overwhelming. Just enough to remind you that courtly grace sits on top of a pile of shedding, scratching, occasionally incontinent reality. Elizabeth shifts in her chair, and you notice a dark patch on her outer petticoat. Could be spilled wine, could be paw prints, could be worse. A maid notices too, gently adjusting the Queen's skirt to cover it. They move like dancers, choreographed around accidents and odours no one dares mention aloud. And here's your scholarly debate. Some historians argue that Elizabeth's fondness for animals was genuine affection, a rare personal softness in an otherwise rigid life. Others suggest it was calculated, part of her constructed image as a natural ruler, close to innocence, uncorrupted by children or husbands. The truth, likely both. The love was real. The mess came with it. A second dog enters, this one smaller, fluffier, trailing a piece of thread from what was probably the Queen's favourite curtain. It bounds across the room and launches itself into her lap. She accepts it without flinching. A lady steps forward to retrieve the thread. Another follows with a scented handkerchief to dab the Queen's wrist, now damp from eager licks. You glance toward the tapestry-lined corner of the room where the dogs often sleep. A faint stain darkens the edge of the rug. A maid brings in a bowl of herbs and charcoal and sets it beside it. Deodorizing, they call it. You call it strategic denial. The Queen rises now. The trail of fur floats behind her like royal confetti. The dogs follow, one licking the hem of her gown, the other trying to chew a tassel. Elizabeth doesn't pause. She glides, trailed by chaos and velvet collars. You follow at a distance, stepping over a fresh paw print that glistens slightly in the light. You don't ask what it is. No one does. And behind you, fur, fleas, faint barking, and a monarchy built on the soft, slobbery loyalty of dogs who never cared if you were bathed, powdered, or just covered in old meat drippings. You're back in the Great Hall now. It's early evening, and the golden light makes everything look more flattering than it deserves to. Nobles crowd the room, rustling in stiff silks, whispering behind gloved hands, and lining up like obedient ducklings for their brief audience with the Queen. They smile, they bow, they compliment, but you can see it. The twitches, the flaring nostrils, the barely hidden flinches when they get too close. Elizabeth is seated at the far end of the chamber, high upon her raised platform like a living icon, face powdered, ruff starched, gown resplendent, and around her, a faint haze of scent. It's the usual suspects: rose oil, clove, lavender, musk, but thicker tonight, stronger, weaponized, and yet not quite enough. You watch a French noble approach. He bows low, lips twitching, then rises with a courtly flourish. "Your Majesty," he says through clenched teeth, "you are radiant this evening." His left eye is watering. The Queen nods, unmoved. The scent is just beginning to hit. You edge closer to the receiving line and finally understand what they're going through. It's not just the perfume. It's the underlying cocktail of months of unwashed gowns, stiffened cosmetics, and that uniquely human thing no one dared name aloud at court. The stench of a body held together by willpower and lavender sachets. Here's your historical fact. Elizabeth's court, like many in Europe, ran on the power of flattery. Courtiers were expected to praise not just the Queen's wisdom and leadership, but her appearance, her beauty, her freshness, even when that beauty was crumbling beneath crusted paint and perfume. And they did it, over and over, sometimes in verse, sometimes in song, sometimes through clenched jaws and burning noses. One ambassador famously remarked that Elizabeth smelled of flowers and sun, despite arriving home and immediately reporting to his monarch that she reeked like decay concealed under perfume. Diplomatic immunity or trauma response? Hard to say. You step behind a column just in time to witness a noblewoman lean in to kiss the Queen's hand. Her fingers brush the royal glove and come away with a faint dusting of powder. She discreetly rubs her hands together. The Queen notices. The woman blanches. You think someone's getting reassigned to Ireland. And here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth was so accustomed to flattery that she once reportedly scolded a courtier not for lying, but for being unimaginative. She wanted compliments with flair. Say she glows like dawn. Don't say she smells nice. Say she smells like 1,000 blooming orchards dancing in heaven's breath. The bar was high. The truth was low. You watch a group of young pages standing near the wine table. One nudges the other and whispers something. They all glance at the Queen, then start pinching their noses and giggling. The guard catches them, sends them scurrying with a glare. But you saw it. Everyone knows. They've just learned not to say it. Your comic moment. A painter arrives, summoned to begin the outline of yet another flattering portrait. He approaches the Queen, swears she looks as fresh as dew, then promptly sneezes from the powdered musk cloud. He apologises. The Queen frowns. His hands shake as he prepares his palette. You wonder if his canvas will absorb more lies than paint. Behind the dais, a maid gently waves a fan soaked in rosemary-infused water. It doesn't move the air so much as swirl it. The scent grows stronger. A faint undertone of mildew sneaks in, possibly from the rug, possibly from the Queen's underlayers, possibly from everything. Elizabeth doesn't blink. She remains poised, smiling faintly, while a lord delivers a sonnet comparing her eyes to stars and her breath to meadows kissed by angels. The Queen inclines her head. Her maid inclines her fan. The lord inclines backward, almost tipping into the tapestries. And here's your scholarly debate. Some historians believe Elizabeth cultivated this environment on purpose, that the overpowering scent, the closeness, the discomfort, were all tools to unnerve visitors and assert dominance. Others argue she simply didn't notice anymore, that years of powder, clove oil, and praise had numbed her to her own aura. Both theories hold water. Both stink. You move closer to the Queen's chair. watching her shift slightly in her seat. Her dress creaks. A puff of warmth rises from the layers beneath and drifts upward. A nearby noble coughs gently and pretends to study the ceiling beams. You nod in silent solidarity. One of the Queen's dogs pads into the room and hops into her lap. The court gasps. Adorable. Regal. Distracting. And just like that, the mood lightens. But you notice the truth. As the dog settles, it sniffs the Queen's sleeve, then shakes its head sharply before curling up. Even her spaniels have limits. A maid brings forward a bowl of citrus peels and crushed mint. It's set discreetly on a pedestal near the throne. A subtle deodorizer, or a last-ditch olfactory shield. She doesn't meet anyone's eye as she sets it down. A page faints. Quietly. Dramatically. Possibly heat. Possibly perfume. Possibly the sheer weight of pretending everything's fine when his eyebrows are about to melt. He's removed with grace. No one mentions it. And behind the Queen, the scent holds court of its own. The audience continues. Compliments flow. Gifts are offered. The Queen remains seated, serene, powdered to perfection, wrapped in a gown that likely hasn't seen daylight or fresh air in months. And the courtiers? They continue the dance. Close enough to admire. Not so close they pass out. You exit the hall at last, trailing behind the last of the noble suck-ups. You pass through the doorway and take your first real breath in hours. The air is bland, cold, heavenly. Behind you, the Queen still reigns, beautiful, terrible, fragrant beyond reason, and her court, still holding their breath. You're in the long gallery now. The polished wood floors creak softly beneath your steps, and the walls are lined with paintings, glorious, idealized versions of Elizabeth. Her skin porcelain, her eyes sharp, her lips ruby red. You pause in front of one of them. She looks clean, ethereal, almost supernatural. Then the scent of burning ferns hits your nostrils like a smoky reminder that reality still has a pulse, and it smells like scorched salad. The Queen enters behind you, flanked by maids carrying iron pans of smouldering greenery. The smoke trails in their wake, drifting up into the wooden beams like incense at a church service. You cough. The Queen does not. She's walked through worse. This is a performance and a purification. This isn't about ambience. It's about faking freshness. Your historical fact. During Elizabeth's reign, it was believed that burning aromatic herbs and plants, especially ferns, could cleanse the air of disease. The prevailing theory of the time, miasma, blamed illness on bad air, and so court physicians recommended smouldering botanicals as both protection and purification. Fern smoke was thought to chase away plague, rot, evil spirits, and, let's be honest, the smell of actual life. You follow behind her as the smoke thickens. It curls under portraits, settles on window ledges, clings to her skirts. You notice her eyelids flutter slightly, her only concession to irritation, but she doesn't break stride. The Queen's gown today is stiff with embroidery and edged in fox fur, which is now absorbing the scent like a dead sponge. You pass close and catch a blend of old rose oil, lavender, body heat, and freshly roasted fern. It's a lot. One maid waves a feather fan to keep the air moving. Another sprinkles dried marjoram onto the coals. The smoke shifts flavour, becoming sharper, more peppery. You watch as it drifts toward the Queen's face. She inhales it calmly, lips parting just enough for a tiny puff of clove breath to escape. And here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth's herbal burnings weren't limited to fern. She also used sage, thyme, wormwood, juniper, and even dried orange peel. Each plant had a reputation. Ward off spirits, freshen the breath, invigorate the blood, or just hide the fact that someone in the room hadn't bathed since Easter. You stop beside a large oak table where a silver tray holds yet more herbs, sorted into tidy piles like a witch's sampler. A maid picks through them, muttering softly, then selects a pinch of lavender and tosses it onto the hot plate. The smoke flares purple. You catch a whiff of what might be hair singeing. You don't ask. A small dog sneezes. The Queen glances down. One of the courtiers quietly slips out of the room, his eyes watering, face flushed. The herbal smoke isn't just theatrical. It's aggressive. You can almost feel it settling into your lungs. And here's your comic moment. Imagine being the young lord trying to flirt with a maid during fern hour. You look radiant, cough, like firelit dawn, gag, may I have this, wheeze, dance. The maid just walks away. Smart woman. The Queen stops at a window now, where the maids open a pane. Fresh air swirls in, briefly diluting the fug. But Elizabeth doesn't lean in. She remains statuesque, surrounded by herbal fog, as though stepping into real air would break the spell. You look around. Every corner of the gallery has been claimed by scent. The tapestries smell like time. The velvet curtains have taken on a smoky funk. Even the wooden floors feel sticky, as if soaked in oil at some forgotten moment. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth believed in the cleansing power of herbal smoke, or if it was simply another layer of royal performance. Some claim she directed these rituals herself, choosing which herbs to burn based on her mood or the season. Others believe it was her physician's doing, a preventative measure disguised as courtly fragrance. Either way, the effect was unforgettable. You pass by a brazier still glowing faintly. The maid tending it wears gloves, both to protect her hands and to avoid absorbing the stink. She pokes the coals with a stick, stirs the ashes, and adds a handful of dried bay leaves. A sharp hiss. The smoke thickens again. Now the Queen sits. A carved wooden chair with lions at its feet. She folds her hands in her lap, face serene. Around her, the air trembles with scent. The courtiers keep their distance, not out of fear, but strategy. Get too close, and the perfume-to-smoke ratio becomes lethal. You spot a handkerchief dangling from her sleeve, its edge embroidered with her initials. She lifts it briefly to her nose. Is it to breathe through? To dab her eyes? To mask something even she doesn't want to smell? You'll never know. She tucks it away before you can decide. And here's something that sneaks up on you. The room doesn't just smell fake fresh. It looks it. The light is filtered through smoke. The colours are softened. The Queen's powdered face seems more flawless in this foggy glow. It's working. It's all working. For a moment, even you forget what lies beneath the gown, the ruff, the heavy wig. But then the smoke thins. The draught stirs the herbs. A breeze pushes the scent to the side, and for a split second, you catch a whiff of truth. Sweat. Oil. The stale core behind the curtain. It's gone almost instantly, buried beneath a new plume of thyme and sage. You glance again at the portrait on the wall. She looks untouched there. Ageless. Fragrant. Then you look at the real Queen. A woman held together by powder and ritual. By performance. By fern smoke and lavender, and the hope that no one gets close enough to notice. And as the gallery doors swing open, she rises again. Her skirts rustle. The dogs yawn. The maids reload the braziers. Another room awaits. And with it, another cloud of something that might be cleanliness, but definitely isn't. She's in her bedchamber again now. Late. Quiet. The candles burning low and the noise of the palace reduced to the occasional distant clatter of a dropped pot or a yawning dog. You stand in the shadow of her bed canopy, watching as the final pieces of her daily illusion are carefully removed. The wig, the ruff, the gown, one by one, peeled away like the layers of a dream unravelling. And what's left? Not a myth, not a monarch, a woman. And this woman is dying pretty in a dirty world. Her feet slide out of her slippers with a faint wet sound, and her linen shift, stiff with old perfume and daily sweat, clings for a moment before it's tugged free by the maid. Another steps in to adjust the sheets. You can smell the rose sachets tucked into the mattress corners. You can also smell Elizabeth, the earthy, sour tang of a body that hasn't been bathed, only powdered and perfumed, for far too long. She lies back slowly. Her eyes close. But she's not asleep. She's waiting. Because before she can rest, there's one more step. The paint. A maid opens the tin of ceruse. It's not for application this time, it's for touch-up. Yes, even now. The Queen will not be seen, not even by death itself, without her mask. Her ladies dab at the corners of her lips, adjust the painted curve of her eyebrows, and blend rouge onto her waxen cheeks. You watch as the makeup settles into every wrinkle, every crevice of tired skin. It doesn't soften her, it sharpens her. A mask pressed against time. Your historical fact. Elizabeth wore her iconic white makeup until her final days. Accounts from the court describe her as gaunt, worn thin, and yet still powdered, still painted into the role of sovereign even as her body gave up underneath. She opens her eyes briefly and asks for the mirror. It's handed over without a word. She examines herself. Quiet, then gives the faintest nod. The mirror is taken away. You spot the clove thread nearby, already darkened from use. It's tucked into her pillow now. She sucks gently at it like a sleeping habit. One last burst of that bitter, numbing sweetness to calm the pain in her jaw. Her breath smells like death dressed up for a mask. And here's your fringe tidbit. In her final months, Elizabeth reportedly refused to sleep in a bed. She stood for hours, propped up by pillows, afraid that lying down would be her last act. But tonight, she reclines. Whether it's surrender or simply exhaustion, no one knows. The room is warm, too warm. The dog in the corner stirs, then sighs, curling tighter in its cushion. The Queen's hands twitch beneath the sheets. Her skin is brittle, yellowed at the fingertips, stained with years of contact with lead and mercury. Her nails are ragged, her cuticles cracked, but they're covered now. Gloved in lace, the maid dabs her wrist with rosewater. Then again, then once more. She's not cleaning. She's maintaining the illusion of cleanliness, even now. And here's your comic beat. One of the younger attendants stumbles while crossing the chamber, nearly knocks over a vase of dried herbs, and mutters a panicked apology. The Queen doesn't even stir. At this hour, even royal decorum bends at the knees. You move toward the window. Outside, the sky is dark. But stars begin to blink into view, one by one, as if the heavens are slowly remembering themselves. Inside, the Queen's breath is shallow, but steady. Historians still argue what truly killed her. Was it blood poisoning from the lead in her makeup? Was it an untreated infection, slowly eating away from within? Was it grief, isolation, the slow erosion of time? Some say she simply stopped eating. Others say she refused medicine. But all agree on one thing. She refused to be seen undone. Even in her final moments, Elizabeth demanded to be ready. Her ladies-in-waiting stayed with her in shifts. Not to nurse, to assist. To reapply the mask. To straighten the ruff. To place the jewelled rings on fingers that could no longer feel them. And behind it all, the dirt, the rot, the half-washed linens, the sour breath, the mice in the wainscoting, the smell of old roses going brown. The Queen never washed it away. She outlasted it. She closes her eyes now. The dog shifts again. The fan on the nightstand stirs with the smallest movement of air. One maid gently pulls the sheet higher, tucks it under the Queen's chin. The paint doesn't smudge. She's good at this. So is the Queen. She will sleep looking regal. She will sleep smelling faintly of decay, perfume, and legacy. And here is your scholarly debate. Was this obsession with image in her final days a show of strength or denial? Was she defying mortality or simply afraid of what she'd see without the mask? We don't know. We never will, because she never let us see it. You back away from the bed now. The candlelight flickers. Her breath remains shallow, steady. The door closes behind you, and Queen Elizabeth the Virgin Queen, the Fairy Queen, Gloriana, remains in her bed, perfectly painted, faintly fragrant, and dying in the only way she's ever known how. Sevens. Beautifully. Filthily. On her terms. So now, as we leave the palace behind, the air softens. The scents fade. The thick curtain of perfume and powdered deceit slowly lifts, and what lingers is not the grime, or the rot, or even the smoke, but the strange kind of awe that only comes from witnessing a life lived entirely on display. Elizabeth didn't bathe much. She didn't clean her teeth, or wash her wigs, or disinfect her chambers, but she maintained something else, something harder. The illusion. The crown never slipped. The paint rarely cracked. And the myth? Impeccably preserved, even as everything underneath withered. As you lie back now, think of the Queen not in her gown or her crown, but in that silent, perfumed room, surrounded by loyal women, tiny dogs, a fan still turning gently beside her. She breathes slowly, shallowly, with a string of clove tied gently around her tongue. And all around her, the scent of decay, wrapped in lavender. Your room is quieter than hers. Cleaner, softer. The hum of the fan is steadier. Your sheets aren't embroidered, but they're fresh. And you, my friend, aren't wearing a single drop of white lead. Let yourself drift now. Let the courtly noise dissolve. Let Elizabeth's world, laced with roses, riddled with filth, fade behind the walls of your own quiet kingdom. You're safe. You're warm. You're clean. And the Queen? She ruled it all. Even the rot. Sleep tight. End of script. Sweet dreams.